In the sealed quiet of a forgotten World War II archive, there is a file so thin it looks almost insignificant. Just a few brittle photographs, a logbook, and a blueprint that seems more like a child's sketch than a weapon of war. Yet this is the file that once puzzled every radar station from Normandy to the Baltic. The file of an aircraft built from plywood, glue, and quiet desperation. It asks a question that has echoed through intelligence circles for decades. How did a plane that looked like a toy slip past the most advanced detection systems of WWII, map enemy movements, and return untouched again and again? The answer lies not in brute force, but in the strange intersection of innovation, fear, and the blind spots of wartime technology. In the first winter this aircraft took to the skies, the Allied command did not expect much of it. A wooden reconnaissance plane sounded like a footnote, a compromised idea born from material shortages and the urgency of the Second World War. But the pilots who prepared for its earliest missions sensed something unusual. They moved around the aircraft quietly with a mix of skepticism and curiosity, touching the pale wooden surfaces as if unsure whether the machine would break or surprise them. The engines warmed with a subdued hum, nothing like the aggressive roar of the metal fighters lined beside it. This was the first sign that the war was shifting in unexpected directions. While pilots strapped into the cockpit kilometers away, radar operators scanned their glowing screens, unaware that they were about to face a new problem no manual had prepared them for. Early war radar technology was groundbreaking but crude, built on assumptions about metal surfaces, engine frequencies, and predictable reflections. The operators monitored for distinct signatures, sharp echoes bouncing back from aluminum fuselages, propeller interference, and unmistakable spikes that signaled incoming aircraft. But the wooden plane on its test flight reflected barely anything. It did not fit the pattern. It stood outside the logic of early radar science. As the aircraft rose into the low morning sky, the radar towers continued their sweep, massive structures that symbolized the confidence of wartime engineering. They had detected hundreds of enemy bombers, fighters, and transports. Yet on this day, at the exact moment engineers expected a return signal, the screen stayed silent. The first report logged was not categorized as an anomaly. It was categorized as equipment malfunction. Only later, as these malfunctions repeated, did technicians begin to suspect that something else was at work. The team behind this aircraft had known what they were doing. Before the war, they had studied the emerging principles of radar and discovered an elegant truth. A wooden frame covered in resin and fabric simply did not bounce back signals the same way metal did. The blueprints laid across workshop tables looked simple, almost crude, but the details revealed intelligence far ahead of its time. Airfoil shapes optimized for silent running, paneling arranged to minimize reflectivity, a camera system embedded into the nose. Everything about the design challenged the assumptions of both Allied and Axis technology. Mechanics worked on the wooden fuselage with hands more accustomed to repairing furniture than assembling war machines. They shaped each panel carefully, understanding that even small imperfections could become weaknesses in the air. There was something almost intimate in the way they built it. An aircraft formed not from industrial might but from human craftsmanship. And when it rolled out onto the field again, its fuselage gleamed not like metal, but like polished bone under cold winter light. Its second mission pushed deeper into enemy territory. Flying low over dense forest, the wooden aircraft hugged the contours of the land. The low-altitude run was one of the few ways to survive early war radar coverage, but combined with its near invisibility to radio waves, it became nearly foolproof. Searchlights swept the sky that night, crisscrossing like enormous white blades, but the aircraft stayed just below their reach, gliding through layers of darkness no interceptor had reason to enter. Inside enemy radar stations, confusion grew. Reports began to conflict. Unexplained gaps in detection zones, sudden photographic maps of installations that should have been impossible to obtain. Evidence of reconnaissance flights that could not be traced to anything appearing on the radar logs. Officers questioned whether Allied forces had developed a new type of aircraft, or whether there were systemic faults in the detection arrays. Engineers tested the equipment repeatedly, but the equipment was functioning. Something else was slipping through their defenses. The camera embedded in the aircraft's nose captured sharp frames, railway lines, convoy formations, ammunition stockpiles. These images returned to Allied airfields sealed in film canisters carried by pilots who knew they had just participated in something extraordinary. In intelligence rooms, officers spread the photographs across tables, tracing enemy supply routes and troop movements with growing certainty. The quality and risk of the captures indicated a Recon aircraft, yet the enemy's radar logs reported nothing. A contradiction that should not have been possible in the technological landscape of WWII. Anti-aircraft crews stationed along key routes became increasingly alert. They had been warned of an unidentified aircraft believed to be conducting dangerous reconnaissance. Yet even with searchlights, even with interceptors scrambled at the faintest rumor of a crossing, the sky remained empty. On one night mission, fighter pilots climbed into cloud cover with orders to shoot down anything that moved. But they found nothing. The weather swallowed their efforts, and the wooden plane passed beneath them without sound. As the missions continued, intelligence officers not only reviewed the photographs, they began mapping entire enemy sectors based on the wooden aircraft's ability to penetrate radar networks. Its routes expanded, its risks increased, and each time it returned, the logs grew thicker, the coded notes more confident, the maps more detailed. The dawns that followed these missions saw air bases come alive with a strange energy. Part disbelief, part pride, part fear of how long the advantage could last before the enemy adapted. By the 17th mission, pilots walked from the aircraft with a look shared by those who understood they were flying something far more significant than a reconnaissance tool. They were flying a ghost, a presence that moved through one of the most heavily monitored skies of the Second World War, and left almost no trace. Enemy radar arrays suffered unexplained strain, recording distortions and signal drops that technicians struggled to explain. Some blamed atmospheric interference, others, sabotage. Few considered that the real cause was airborne. The story's first half ends with a file stamped classified, a report summarizing the radar failures that changed air reconnaissance in WWII. And inside that file lies the undeniable truth. The wooden aircraft had reshaped the intelligence war by exploiting the blind spots of technology that was supposed to make the skies predictable. The classified file continues with an account of the missions that followed, operations that tested the limits of what a wooden aircraft could do in the unforgiving machine logic of World War II. As the Second World War intensified and both sides pushed their intelligence networks to the breaking point, this improbable machine evolved from an experimental curiosity into one of the most quietly effective reconnaissance tools of the conflict. It operated in the narrow margins where radar, weather, and human expectation failed to meet, and in those margins it thrived. By the time the 18th mission was underway, the enemy had already started reinforcing their radar nets. They added overlapping arrays, recalibrated frequencies, and reorganized their intercept groups. But radar of the early 1940s was still a young technology, rooted in principles that assumed every significant aircraft reflected a measurable signal. The idea that something could physically fly yet remain nearly invisible to radio waves seemed absurd to commanders who trusted the new science. So the wooden aircraft kept flying, using the very confidence of enemy engineers as cover. Its pilots followed routes drawn up in rooms thick with cigarette smoke and tense calculation. Intelligence officers marked supply lines and troop movements with red pencils, adjusting the aircraft's path to avoid newly fortified zones. Each flight demanded precision. The wooden frame could not absorb damage the way metal bombers could. Yet the pilots, increasingly accustomed to the machine's gliding silence and peculiar handling, guided it through the war's aerial arteries with a calm born from repetition and faith in an unlikely design. As the 20th mission approached, the skies grew more dangerous. Scrambled fighters patrolled sectors based on rumors alone, sweeping through clouds with guns armed and orders simplified. If it flies without a signal, bring it down. But weather became the wooden aircraft's ally. Cloud cover wrapped the plane in shifting gray corridors, masking its silhouette and muffling engine noise. Pilots watched the world dissolve into mist, trusting their instruments and training as they navigated toward strategic points marked weeks earlier by reconnaissance analysts. Every photograph the aircraft carried back accelerated a broader transformation in Allied intelligence work. Analysts mapped ammunition routes, tracked armored divisions, and predicted troop movements with greater clarity than any previous operation had allowed. A single photograph, developed minutes after landing, could confirm a convoy's shift or expose a decoy installation. The aircraft's success pushed the boundaries of what reconnaissance could achieve in WWII. It wasn't simply gathering information, it was rewriting the understanding of how information could be acquired under the radar's increasingly watchful eye. Yet the wooden aircraft could not stay invisible forever. In late war reports, radar technicians began to document anomalies that hinted at its existence. Small disruptions, irregular interference, and degraded accuracy in systems that previously operated with predictable reliability. They eventually suspected an aircraft made of non-metal materials, though identifying it remained impossible. These suspicions prompted upgrades and experiments that would later evolve into more advanced detection systems, but by then the wooden plane had already delivered most of the intelligence it was designed to capture. Some reports suggest that on its final missions, the aircraft flew dangerously close to newly installed radar towers, intentionally skirting ranges to test detection thresholds. Whether these flights were strategic tests or acts of pilot daring remains unclear. What is clear is that the aircraft consistently returned with its mission logs intact, coded notes, exposure charts, timing data, all feeding a system that needed every fragment of intelligence it could gather as the war accelerated toward its final brutal phases. One of the last entries in the classified file describes a dawn takeoff. The wooden aircraft rolled across a cold airfield, its engines quiet, its frame lightly vibrating. Pilots had grown accustomed to its fragility and its resilience, the paradox at the core of its effectiveness. The sky was pale, the ground frozen, and the base still half asleep. But the urgency remained. Each new sortie carried the weight of thousands of decisions that depended on fresh aerial intelligence. Commanders trusted the aircraft's photographs more than any intercepted transmission or human report. The war's future, in subtle ways, shifted with every reel of film. On this mission, the aircraft encountered heavy turbulence, and for a moment its survival was uncertain. A wooden fuselage is unforgiving under stress. It flexes, bends, and risks catastrophic failure. Yet the aircraft endured. When it returned to base, the damage was visible. Hairline cracks, stressed joints, scorched edges along the engine housing. Mechanics worked through the night, patching, sanding, reinforcing. The aircraft was never meant to last as long as it did, but necessity kept it flying. Its pilots, stepping away after the mission, understood that they had participated in something history would struggle to categorize. They had flown a reconnaissance platform that defied expectations, fooled enemies, and exploited a technological blind spot that likely saved thousands of lives by giving the Allies strategic clarity at critical moments. They had been ghosts in the sky, unseen, untracked, and essential. As the war neared its end, radar arrays across enemy territory showed signs of strain. Reports documented unexplained frequency fluctuations, misaligned readings, and breakdowns that could not be fully attributed to weather or interference. These systems had been exposed, stressed by the invisible flights threading through them. After the conflict, when the captured logs were reviewed, engineers finally understood the threat they had missed. A wooden aircraft had flown through their most guarded skies, seen their secrets, and returned unscathed. The final page of the intelligence file bears a stamp that reads, "Declassified, release approved." Below it, a short note from an unnamed officer summarizes the entire story. During the Second World War, technological supremacy often rested not on what a nation had, but on what the enemy failed to see. This truth encapsulates the legacy of the wooden reconnaissance aircraft. In a war defined by steel, firepower, and overwhelming industrial output, it was a machine made of the simplest materials that exposed the limits of early radar and expanded the possibilities of covert intelligence. Its missions remind us that innovation is not always loud, and victory is not always visible. Sometimes the most decisive actions are carried out by things that leave almost no trace. The wooden plane that fooled every radar in WWII did more than gather photographs. It revealed the fragility of certainty in modern warfare. It exposed blind spots in systems believed to be infallible. And it proved that even in an age of rapid mechanization, the simplest ideas, executed with precision and courage, could shape the outcome of the most destructive conflict in human history. Its legacy endures in every stealth aircraft that followed, in every radar-evading design, and in every intelligence operation that learned from its silence. A wooden ghost from the skies of World War II, now remembered not for its material but for its mastery of the unseen.